Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Hey, Nat, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. So you were riffing some Sontag for me before.
I was practicing, yeah.
Cool. Because I've delved quite a bit into that essay. So in David Thomas's essay on your exhibition, Flesh for Fantasy, he mentions the importance that Susan Sontag's 1964 essay Against Interpretation holds for your work. Do you want to say anything about the essay before we?
I'd just like to also welcome the traditional owners of the land and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the Turrbal and Yurrugul people of Meanjin and Brisbane. I'm also situated really close to this. I had to sit on this side because if I break it, it's my fault. So it's a glass work.
I just think there'd be 1,000 pieces of art then if you break it.
Yeah. Susan Sontag, so Against Interpretation, is kind of closely linked to my exegesis when I was back at uni, ontological painting, the abstract and the physical. So her description of erotics in interpretation, is not entirely literal and not entirely abstract. So she argues to her readers that we have to look at that place in between those two extremes of meaning.
Okay.
And that's kind of the basis for this show. Yeah.
Great. I did read the essay in preparation for this conversation with you. And I found it incredibly erudite and rich, even though it only ran 10 pages long. It was very impressive. So she ends her essay by saying, in place of a hermeneutics, we need an erotics of art. In that vein, I opted to theme today's exploration Eros and the rupture of reason. So I'd like to share a story from Greek mythology. So Eros is the Greek god of love, also known to us as Cupid. In this story, Apollo, Greek god of harmony, reason, and moderation personified, has just killed the python with 1,000 arrows. And in all his wisdom, after the victory, Apollo taunts and ridicules Cupid, saying that the little boy has no business playing with arrows. Did you know this? No? Okay. So in retaliation, Eros dips a sharp arrowhead in gold and shoots Apollo in the heart with it. And he dips a blunt arrowhead in lead and shoots the nymph Daphne in the heart with that. So the result is that Apollo ends up madly impassioned with Daphne, while Daphne is entirely repulsed by Apollo. Out of the feverishness of his passion, Apollo chases Daphne, and when he eventually catches up to her, she cries out to her father, Peneus, who transforms Daphne into a laurel tree so that she cannot be captured by Apollo. So I find this story fitting as Sontag urges us away from a hermeneutics of art toward an erotics of art. So the question I have is, as we hurl ourselves into Sontag's perspective, to what extent are we to leave behind our reason, and maybe we can attempt some of this today, and become like the uncharacteristic Apollo, feverishly impassioned in pursuit of art?
Yeah, I like that story. I think, Susan Sontag was about, leaning into that less literal form of reading art and more towards the sensuous. So our gut feelings, our emotion and our interest combine to kind of give us those understanding of art. A friend of mine recently, she's a scientist, she came to a show and she'd never kind of come to an art opening before. She asked me, so what do I do here? How far away do I stand from the artwork? And how long do I linger in front of each work? And I found that so interesting because I thought it's not about that. You can do as you please in an art gallery. Once the art has left the artist's studio, it's up to the viewer to interpret it however which way they wish. It's a reflection of us in a space with the works more than it is what the artist intended it to be.
Sure. Was that for this show? That your
Every
friend...
show.
Every show your friend comes along and
Oh,
asks
no,
you...
sorry. Oh, the last show.
Oh, the last
last
show.
year.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, that's commitment. She wants to know how far away to stand
It
every
was
show.
committed. Yeah.
So, I'd like to talk a bit about the pieces in the exhibitions. I've pulled this out. I understand that for you there's a relationship between painting and the body, and perhaps that paintings are themselves bodies, objects in the world rather than objects that represent the world or imitate reality. So I won't ask you what your art represents or what it means, but could you tell us a bit about some of the objects you've created for this show and what you see them as?
Yeah, so all of these works intend to be what they are. So they are innately a painting. And since the 60s, and modernism, we've shied away from representing something real in the world or depicting realism as such. So I kind of draw on that period a lot with these works. Clement Greenberg famously said, "It is what it is, paint is paint, surface is surface." So I kind of keep that in the back of the mind all the time. Before I make a painting, I ask, what a painting is and how can I make it more of a painting. So with that, I relate that to the body, and I think like paintings are a reflection of us or a reflection of our world around us. So a lot of the paintings are bodily scaled. So I look at my own body and in almost an autobiographical way, I measure like my feet. So this stand is my foot width apart. The painting's body is the same size as my body from my toe to my chin. So I use a lot of my own body as scale for the artworks. These ones across the back wall are all at arms apart. So they have that kind of distance, 65 centimetres is my arm apart. So I've placed them all like that. I think like subconsciously we kind of get that. We feel like relative to bodies and paintings in the space around us. I also think they're quite bodily in the way that they are similar to us. They have common physicalities. They have fronts, backs. They're an object as such as we are. They have both like the abstract and the physical. We're made up of that. Our bodies are made up of that. And so are these paintings. So I choose a number of different materials. So there's Italian linens and there's Belgian linens. So they're slightly different coloured skins as such. But I use the same paints to form that consistency in the body of work. Same colours and, fleshy tones.
Okay. And I guess what I'm hearing, because one could argue, so given that this is, your height or your width apart or arm lengths apart, are those not representations? But I don't know, what would you say?
Yeah, I think they're conceptually representations.
Okay.
And I also think like we can't help but stand on the shoulders of giants like those who have come before us in the art world. We have learnt things from, predecessors. So it's about building on that and using elements, I think, as they fit.
Okay. Yeah, I like to think of them as maybe, I'm trying, to really take on what Sontag had to say in her essay and avoid representing some. Just going to think of them as paintings that just happen to be the same height as you or something like that.
Yeah.
But I want to delve a little bit into Plato because Sontag does, and it's important. So the practice of art interpretation goes back to ancient Greek philosophy. Sontag tells us that Plato, who proposed the theory of mimesis, seems to have done so in order to rule that the value of art is dubious. Yeah, It's great to hear, especially in an art gallery. So he considered ordinary material things as themselves mimetic objects, so as in imitations of transcendent forms or structures. So Plato's idea is that, well, this is a chair, it's an object in the world, but out there somewhere is the perfect idea of a chair. And so this is just a copy of that perfect reality. So then a painting, so if an artist were to represent that chair in a painting, Plato's view is that, well, that's just a copy of a chair. So, you know, there's this real sense that Plato is saying, well, this is already corrupted, and so the art of this is twice corrupted. Do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have a story about one of my lecturers at uni said to me, so like, you know, we're talking about abstract art and realism.
Yeah.
And he kind of said they've got the terminology mixed up. Abstract art is more real in that it is paint on a surface. It's a painting, it is itself.
Yes.
Whereas realism is an abstraction of something that is real.
Yeah.
So I found that that just blew my mind. Yeah. And I was like, oh, I just want to be an abstract artist, you know?
Okay.
So that just reminded me what you were saying. It's almost like that. This is not a pipe painting. And it's a painting of a pipe. It's a painting, you know? Yeah.
No, I can really appreciate that perspective. I'll have to go and kind of mull it over. I like it when, you know, ideas or concepts almost flip the world on its head, right? Where realism is really just mimesis, but abstract art is the real object in the world. Very cool. So Nietzsche astutely picks up on the moralistic character of this Plato's theory of mimesis, truth or grasping at the real, being considered of highest moral value, while art and even the physical world itself is of little value to Plato, except insofar as it points us toward or gives us insights into grand truths, right? So there's this sense in which art criticism and art interpretation carries on this tradition, because let's say if we had, I don't know, a critic in here and they're looking at your work and they're writing about it, they're trying to excavate some deeper sense, deeper meaning out of the object. And that's precisely the criticism in Sontag's essay, right? So can you give us your views on, I guess, art criticism or art interpretation in connection to, like, trying to excavate meaning and
I think, you know, we all go to art school. Well, we go to art school and, you know, we're taught Western art theory and how to interpret art. I think like a lot of art theory and critical analysis is based in like, you know, or it used to be a lot based in the church and like biblical terminology, like Catholicism, you know. You'd see in the churches the stained glass windows. There'd be certain pictures that represent ideas and values. So in art history, we learn to do that in the way of like formalist approach. So formalism is like we can look at the brushstroke or mark making, and to that, you know, like alarm bells go off. Oh, that's gesture. That means the artist's kind of authorization. You know, it's their signature on the artwork. But what I'm trying to do is like get away from those kind of predetermined, you know, links that we have in our mind to interpret them in another way, because that's not really, you know, I don't put a brushstroke on and say, look, I'm the genius artist and I did a brushstroke. Yeah, Nat was here, you know, 2023.
Yeah, right.
It's more, I think it's more than that. And I think everybody knows it's more than that. We don't need to put our signature on the front of the works anymore. It's not about the artist. I think it's more about the art. So these works, just trying to play with that idea and how you can create some kind of like all-over effect or bring, reduce art to this minimalist form to I'm looking for something, in doing that, and trying to get away from that authorship of the painter.
So what's the critic to do at this point, or the interpreter?
I think I liked what you were saying earlier about interpreting art, and it's that interpret with the senses, but not as young children, between 1 and 5, you're taught your 5 senses and being in the present moment and what can you touch, taste, smell, hear, brings you back to this moment right now. It's more than that, and it's almost, like Sontag says, between those two extremes of literal and abstract thinking. And I feel like that's where I would like to be viewing and analysing and critiquing work, instead of having, a learnt dictionary of what things are supposed to mean, because there's so much nuance in meaning that how can we stick to those terms?
And that's something we talked about in preparation for this talk. So the idea that, as young children, we have our senses, we're just sort of coming to learn about the world and get in touch with the world, and then we go to school and we, essentially are given these structures within which to think. And so the, I guess, invitation here is to, we can't go backwards, we can't return to a formalist view of the world, but maybe there's a post-formalism where we go beyond intellectualization and just kind of stand there and allow our feelings to be felt, even though our heads are pretty full. So continuing on with Sontag, so she says in this same essay, in a culture whose already classical dilemma is the hypertrophy of the intellect at the expense of energy and sensual capability, interpretation is the revenge of the intellect upon art. I like that. I appreciate her use of the term hypertrophy in contrast to atrophy of intellect, which might result in an impoverished appreciation of art. Hypertrophy or excess of intellect would seem to lead to the same result, an impoverished appreciation of art. So philosopher Simon Critchley, in his book that I'm reading presently, and I thought, this ties in. The book's called Tragedy, the Greeks and Us, takes Plato to task on this point. So Critchley notes that Plato reduces art to sophistry, as we've discussed, copy-making, uninformed and insincere, antilogia, meaning anti-word or anti-thought, or contradictory to word and thought. Plato's argument, as we've said, is premised on the moral value of truth or reality. So when an art critic or interpreter peers into a work to uncover its truth, they're performing a Platonic operation, remedying anti-logos with logos. I'd like to share sort of my perspective on that. Is I think there might be an underlying fear in many of us that we attempt to assuage with logos. Because, I was looking at some of these pieces and they evoke affect in me. And if I'm not too comfortable with how I'm feeling, then maybe I want to jump into my head and I want to start, talking about the brushstrokes and the colours and so forth. But I don't know. Why do you think, as I guess, or in art, there's this perpetual attempt to impose words and concepts and constructs onto art?
Well, I think it's clearly because everybody wants to know the meaning. That's the number one question, I think, when you go to an art gallery or you visit an artist studio or the university galleries, you kind of ask, what does this mean? It doesn't all have to be allegorical, you can just exist with it. And that's the part of art that I'm interested in.
Okay. And do you think meaning here is a kind of, don't know, part of the human condition that maybe there's no answer to, but we're kind of addicted to?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
We're greedy, I think. Yeah. Want to know it all.
Yeah. So how would you then, taking all this into account, suggest that we approach your art that's hanging here?
Well, I think just have some fun with it. Like the title Flesh for Fantasy came from Billy Idol's smash hit in the 80s. It's all about erotic dances on a video clip. It's lots of fun. So I think experience the art and interact with the art, and just be at one with the art.
Just be with it? Okay, very good. And you were telling me something earlier about dancing with myself.
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to share that?
So I'd just like to thank Dr. David Michael Thomas for doing the writing for the show. And he was a big influence just on me as an artist, but also his musician. So he come over and we talked and discussed this body of work back in May at the studio, and he immediately said, "Oh, do you know the song by Billy Idol, Flesh for Fantasy?" And he played it on my laptop in the studio. And I was like, I've never heard this. Like, who is this guy?
Yeah.
But it was really fun, and it was really kind of a punk rock, Billy Idol's, I think he's English, and he moved to New York City.
Yeah.
And anyway, I upon further research and after making this work here, found the song Dancing With Myself, and the background of that is him and his bass guitarist were touring in Japan in, I think, 79, and they were kind of watching all the young clubbers dancing with all the big panelled mirrored walls in the nightclub instead of with each other.
Yeah.
So they were just dancing with themselves. And I love that. And then I've re-listened to that song earlier today, and it just reminds me of this work now. So it's funny this is collection.
With myself?
I had already titled it, but that would have been a great title.
Also known as.
Yeah.
No, that's a great story. So I guess maybe we would encourage you to come, stand here, dance with yourself at a safe distance.
Yes, it's very heavy.
Was there, look, I mean, we touched on a lot of things. So there was Sontag's views, of course, Apollo's frenzy, Daphne's revulsion, Cupid's vengefulness, Plato's obsession with truth over passion, and the moral character of art criticism. Was there anything in that you wanted to sort of say any more on as we kind of bring it to a close?
I'm pretty happy with all that.
Yeah.
But any questions would be great.
Yeah,
Anyone has
please.
any?
So we'll open it to
Who's been
the audience.
taking notes? Yeah.
Let's find out. Sure.
Either of you or both of you, as far as non-representational works go, where does a reflective work sit in that?
Yeah.
Scale?
Great question. You go.
I love that question. So I don't know, to be honest. I don't have an answer, but this piece is like a manufactured piece of glass. So I worked with the glass architect at G. James Glass in the basement. We were nerding out over all the different colours, when you can cross them together and they make different colours, and the world's your oyster. You can do whatever you want with these glass pieces. So this is a construct of an 8% transparency mirror and 2 different coloured laminates. So Sahara Sun and Tangerine are the titles of those pigmented laminates in between. So that's how this work was created. But I guess in relation to, representation, all art is a reflection of ourselves. So I think this is just more literal in the way that it's interactive. And if you take a selfie and tag me in it for later, it's also representing me. So I think I don't think you can escape representation in art. because we're always looking at it, and it's always, it's existed as long as we have. Why do we do that? Why does it even matter? And I feel like it's because of that representation. As much as we want, minimalist artists want to strip it all back and make it all about what a painting is, it's still related to us. We can't get away from that representation, I feel.
Mm. And I'd like to add, I think it would depend on how the viewer sees themselves. I think that we often go about in the world with an image of ourselves in our minds. And so when you're standing opposite the mirror, if you see yourself as the image of yourself, then you'd say the piece is highly representative. But if you're kind of just with it, almost in a Zen state, then maybe it's not representative at all. So it has representative scale.
I agree. We all create our own image of ourselves, and what we see in the mirror every morning isn't the right.
Yeah, as opposed to really looking at what's there.
Exactly.
So here's an opportunity to be confronted with ourselves as we actually are, as opposed to an image of ourselves. But yeah, great question. Thank you. Carl?
When you first had a discussion, you talked about your scientist friend who wanted to know how far away and all those things.
Yeah.
Isn't that, in a way, an acknowledgement of the control that an artist has when doing exhibitions like this, though? That you, as in laying out the space and in laying it out in order of your body and relation to your body, you're creating the dance inside the show. So she just wanted to know how to dance.
Yeah. No, I love that, Carl. That's awesome. I feel like, we manipulate the environment as to how we want people to interact with it. And every gallery is curated, whether they like it or not, whether it's done, I think, well or not. It's just like...
Is there a tension there, though, between what you were talking about of the openness of interpretation, the complete openness, where it's actually not complete? It's an equation, there's more happening. It's not just someone will walk in and decide. It's you're having the ability to control parts of it.
It is, I think it's that, it comes back to our agency as artists, like how much agency are you putting onto the space or the work or the environment, and how much agency are the materials and the paints and things happening. So, again, I think like as much as I like, setting up and curating and having that formal side of these works, because they are based in formalism. Like I can't escape that. They're so, they're formal. But I like that, structure of having that, layout of the work. But then the works being so much removed from that and having their own, painterly agency. So I think they're like contradicting each other, in a way. But yeah, I think you brought up a good point about it's orchestrated from the beginning. How do you just have a raw experience with the work?
Yeah. What I like about, I guess, thinking about that question as well is no matter how or to what extent we may control the work or the environment in which it's displayed, there's actually no ultimate control, because once the viewer walks into the space, something will happen that, the curator or the artist may not have foreseen. So yeah, I like that tension there. You can control as much as you want, arm length apart, but then what happens just happens. But, yeah. We have plenty of time, so please, comments, questions, thoughts, ponderings. Or if you're keen to just, move on to the dancing in front of the mirror with one, we can do that.
That's what we're all here for.
Okay. All right, well, if there's nothing else, I'd like to say thank you, Nat, for having this conversation with me.
Yeah,
and thank you all for being here. Enjoy the show, and I believe there's drinks. Yeah? All right. Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Did you have fun?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
That was great. Really great read.